Elizabeth Audencream.
Bondi Beach Grief Ghouls. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Prince Harry and this one's wife have met survivors of the Bondi Beach terror attack as they now wind up their Australian trip. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are wrapping up their trip on Friday, making the most of the autumn sun with a Sydney Harbour boat ride alongside Invictus Australia representatives before attending a Super Rugby Pacific match. But they started their time in Sydney at Bondi, where 15 people were killed in the 14th of December terror attack. They met emergency workers who responded to the attack, as well as representatives of the Sydney Jewish Museum, which is opening an exhibition on the massacre. After arriving at the Bondi Surf Bathers Life-Saving Club on Friday morning, the couple spoke to Jessica Chapnick-Khan, who survived the attack while shielding her 5-year-old daughter after attending a Hanukkah party. They also spoke to Elon Zeiser, age 40, who survived after being shot numerous times while shielding his children. They met Shannon Biederman, the museum's senior curator, who said it was really special to have them visit. Let's have a look at them strutting around on the beach. The footage is interesting because it shows them exiting the life-saving club and then heading down onto the beach, surrounded mainly by press and the lifesavers themselves, with some members of the public expressing an interest. You can see the cameras being held and some people wanting selfies. But I think the most notable aspect of it is that you can see in the background there's lots of people who've stayed in the sea, there's lots of people who've remained on the beach, and you can see that there is a small crowd gathered, but they're not rushing over to see what's going on. There wasn't a large crowd waiting for them to exit from the life-saving club. As you saw in the background, many people are just getting on with their day. They're not bothered about it. And the distant shot, which shows the crowd, maybe 50 or so people milling around, significant amount of those individuals being the surf rescue people and the press themselves. So it's hardly a throng, it's hardly getting mobbed by the masses. Once again, it's pure positive fuel for this one's wife because these tertiary sources are showing an interest in her, filming her, photographing her, and of course, this is all capitalising off grief, as we've come to know from the tragedy tourists, the grief ghouls. I think it's fair to say that in the lexicon of modern celebrity, few terms capture the essence of the false compassion better than the concept of tragedy tourism. This describes the phenomenon where public figures descend upon sites of unimaginable sorrow, not primarily to aid, but to be seen aiding. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have emerged as poster children for this practice. This latest pilgrimage to Bondi Beach in Sydney, the scene of a devastating mass shooting mere months prior, forms the latest chapter in a disquieting pattern. Uvalde, the Los Angeles wildfires, and now Bondi. Many of you predicted, as did I, that they would turn up and utilise Bondi Beach for their own purposes, and so it has come to pass. You'll remember that this one's wife's initial foray into this arena came in the immediate aftermath of the Robb Elementary School shooting in Uvalde in Texas in May 2022. 19 children and 2 teachers were gunned down in one of America's most heart-wrenching mass shootings. Just days later, this one's wife made an unannounced visit to the small town. Dressed casually in jeans, a t-shirt and blue baseball cap, she was photographed laying white roses at a makeshift memorial outside the courthouse. She walked the site, offering what appeared to be a quiet gesture of support. However, it just so happened that lots of media outlets captured the moment. And whilst her supporters would hail it as a compassionate act from a mother herself, those in the know recognised the speed with which she arrived on the scene and the publicity it generated. Uvalde was a community in profound shock, grappling with loss and questions of accountability. And into this vortex stepped a celebrity whose own narrative of victimhood, detailed in the Oprah interviews and tell-all books, was still fresh in people's minds. The optics really suggested less about the victims and more about aligning with a cause célèbre, gun violence in America. In March 2024, the couple returned to Uvalde during a trip to Austin for this one's wife's South by Southwest appearance, visiting the family of slain teacher Irma Garcia. Again, this supposedly surprise visit was quickly publicised, maintaining the connection between these grief ghouls and the opportunism that they exhibit. Then in January 2025, when Southern California was ravaged by some of the most destructive wildfires in its history, along came this one's wife. The Eaton fire and others displaced thousands, destroyed homes and strained emergency services. Yet amidst this chaos, Harry and this one's wife made another appearance, this time at a meal distribution centre in Pasadena. They were seen hugging residents, speaking with World Central Kitchen volunteers and first responders, and even serving food. This one's wife, sporting an LA baseball cap, cut a conspicuous figure. She and Harry were seen going to the site of burned down homes, even though residents themselves were not allowed to do so. You'll remember that actress Justine Bateman took to social media, branding them no better than ambulance chasers and disaster tourists engaged in a repulsive photo opportunity. They are touring the damage, she said. Are they politicians now? They don't live here. They are tourists. This backlash highlighted the way that this one's wife and Harry utilised supposedly humanitarian gestures for the purposes of positive press. Now, in April 2026, the pattern repeats again, but this time on the other side of the world. Australia is still healing from the December 2025 Bondi Beach massacre, an anti-Semitic terrorist attack at a Hanukkah celebration in Archer Park. 2 gunmen, allegedly inspired by Islamic State, opened fire, killing 15 people, including men, women and a child, and injuring dozens more. It was Australia's worst mass shooting in decades, shattering the tranquility of one of Sydney's iconic beaches. Harry and this one's wife made their way to Bondi Beach and met with the survivors that I mentioned earlier on. This timing could not be more telling. Tacking on a visit to the Bondi massacre site, a place of fresh national trauma, rightly has ignited fresh outrage, particularly among Australians. It's been labelled as disaster tourism at its most tone deaf, using the worst day in Sydney's recent history for PR, drawing a tour already mired in questions of relevance. These are a pair of griefters, a grim portmanteau of grifters and grief, which just demonstrate the sustained behaviours as they're at it again. What unites these instances isn't the sincerity of emotion, but the consistency of the performance. Each visit follows a familiar script, a surprise arrival, casual yet photogenic attire, interactions with victims or responders captured for posterity, and then the inevitable media amplification. Harry and this one's wife have positioned themselves as global advocates for mental health, veterans' issues and various humanitarian causes through their Archwell philanthropies. However, this tragedy tourism serves more as a shortcut to relevance than sustained behind-the-scenes work. In other words, it's far easier for this one's wife to get to the prime aims by being a grief ghoul than it is actually running up her sleeves and doing some proper work. The fact is, it's opportunism once again from these two, that they cannot demonstrate true consistency of effort, but instead they seize upon an opportunity to leverage the grief and pain of others for their own purposes. When this trip to Australia was announced, many of you in the comments and in emails contacted me, particularly those of you from Australia, suggesting that the grief tourists, the grief ghouls, the tragedy tourists would make an attendance at Bondi Beach because it was just too good an opportunity for them to miss. Once again, demonstrating the predictability for which they've become known, they've done it again. Turning up, pretending that they care, but simply using it for their own purposes, particularly in relation to this one's wife, because as you know, as a consequence of her narcissism, nothing she does is genuine, it's all self-serving. The only upside of this is that they didn't draw a massive crowd, that most people stayed away, that most people continued to engage in their swimming and bathing and soaking up the sun, rather than coming to see what was going on amongst the small crowd that was gathered. It isn't a surprise, it's par the course in relation to these two fuckwits, and once again, they demonstrate how they utilise the tragedy of others for the purposes of their own. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for watching.